Tonight on Primetime Politics, forging a new path.
The government is responding to the impact of the unjust U.S. tariffs with multiple tools.
The Carney government unveils a plan to tackle the Trump tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum, measures that include countervailing tariffs and action on the dumping of foreign steel and aluminum. Coming up, we'll get details on what's being promised and some early reaction as well. Plus,
consultation, cooperation, engagement, participation is at the heart of C-5.
The government pushes to get its One Canadian Economy bill passed, but are they doing so at the expense of the environment, at the expense of reconciliation? Our political strategists will weigh in. And
when I go out, and yesterday, I get pretty passionate.
The Ontario Premier apologizes for a comment that's been described as racist and offensive. This is Primetime Politics. Hello, I'm Michael Serapio. Well, Prime Minister Mark Carney announced some new action today aimed at shoring up Canada's steel and aluminum industries. Both those industries hurt by tariffs introduced by the Trump administration this spring. 25% in March increased to 50% on June the 4th. Take a listen now to what we heard from the Prime Minister earlier today.
We must reinforce our strength at home and safeguard Canadian workers and businesses from the unjust U.S. tariffs that exist at present. And that's why we're announcing that Canada will be introducing a series of countermeasures to protect Canadian steel and aluminum workers and producers.
And as for those countermeasures, they include a promise to adjust Canadian tariffs against Canadian steel by July the 21st. It would be reflective of where trade talks with the U.S. will be at that time. Also, a move to limit access to federal procurement contracts. And finally, a promise to address steel and aluminum dumping in the coming weeks. Well, CPAC's Andrew Thompson has more on today's announcement. Andrew, good to see you. Talk to us about today's announcement and really how it addresses the kind of concerns we've been hearing from steel and aluminum, not to mention labor.
Right. Well, Michael, we know that the steel and aluminum tariffs and the spin-off effects have hit those industries hard. Just to give you one example, Algoma Steel in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, had to pay more than $10 million in tariffs after just 2 weeks. And it's also led to layoffs, hundreds of workers across the steel and aluminum sectors. The United Steelworkers just last week were accusing the government of inaction after more than 150 workers were laid off in Hamilton. So in many ways, what was announced today is a direct response to labor and industry groups wanting to see federal action. And that includes action on the dumping of foreign steel in Canada. That's cheaper steel that is manufactured outside this country, but it hurts Canadian industry because they undercut the cost of the products made at home. Take a listen to what Prime Minister Mark Carney had to say about that.
The U.S. tariffs on steel and aluminum are global tariffs. They're not targeted specifically at Canada, but they, of course, affect our steel industries and our workers. And one of the consequences of that effect, or prospective consequences, is that steel from other countries, from third countries, start to come into Canada if we don't protect our industries. So we're setting these quotas. It's a long word, tariff rate quotas, but a quota for the amount of steel that can come in from third countries to limit that amount, to stabilize the market. And to be clear, we will be reviewing the level of those tariff rate quotas as this progresses. It depends on what the United States does.
So, Michael, a whole suite of actions which we're going to see get rolled out in the coming weeks.
Okay, so let's talk about some reaction here, Andrew, because, you know, this was just announced mid-afternoon today. So what are we hearing so far from the groups affected?
Well, we actually have a joint statement today from Canadian steel producers and the United Steelworkers Union. They say their initial reaction is that the government's plan falls short of what their industry needs at this most challenging time. Steel industry and labor also saying they'll keep working with the government on a plan that works for them. As for aluminum producers, it's a bit of a different message. That sector is welcoming today's measures. The Aluminum Association of Canada saying the plan strikes the right balance in terms of negotiation, counter tariffs, and new procurement rules. The group also giving a thumbs up to the plan for more tariffs to fight those unfair trade practices. They do say today. The government will need to move fast and intervene in July if that 30-day period for a trade deal comes and goes without a positive result.
Okay, so we continue to watch how this unfolds. Andrew Thompson, thank you for that. CPAC's Andrew Thompson in studio. Well, let's now turn to Bill C-5, the government's One Canadian Economy Act. The rush is on to get this bill through the Commons by day's end tomorrow and get it passed by July the 1st. And that is topic one as we gather our political strategists now. Liberal strategist Susan Smith is founder and principal at Blue Sky Strategies. Conservative strategist Jordan Paquet is vice president at Blue Sky Strategies. And George Soule, not with Blue Sky, former director of communications for the NDP, also founder and principal at On Step Strategies. I'll underline that for you, George. To all three of you.
Hello. We're always happy for a little Blue Sky Strategy Group Club.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And for On Step, yes.
There we go. And Michael. So listen, let's talk about Bill C-5 here. As I said, the rush is on. And I do wonder, Susan, strategically, how important is this bill to get it passed by Canada Day for this government? Because it has been rushed through Parliament.
I think it is important from a strategic perspective. This is a signature commitment of Prime Minister Carney during the election campaign. It's something I think that Canadians support, and so he is trying to move it through the House. It's a two-part bill. It deals with improving labour market mobility between provinces, and it also deals with expediting, smoothing out the process for project approval, not eliminating all the steps that people have to go through, but instead of two environmental assessments, one, building Indigenous consultation right from the get-go, and trying to get so it doesn't take 13 years to build a project in this country, and we can drive some investment into the economy.
Okay, Jordan, what do you say? Because of course Conservatives are supporting this fast track of this bill.
Sure. Yeah, look, it was a political promise for part of this bill for Mark Carney to get it done before Canada Day, and I mean, good for him. They were able to compile it together and get it in front of the House and gather some support for it going forward. But I'll note on the measure, I think Parliament did still have time to make a good study of it, because yesterday through the committee process, the Conservatives were able to make some key amendments with the support of some of the opposition parties to increase some of the measures around accountability, transparency in the bill, in what some of these projects were going to do. So I think the bill, as it was before, was going to have a difficult time passing. I think there were some ethics laws that potentially could have been skirted through, and those could have been concerns that could have come back to haunt the government in the future. So I think the Conservatives were really able to add some strength to that legislation.
Okay, strategically, of course, important for the government. George, what do you say to what we've seen so far with Bill C-5?
Well, it's so nice to see the Liberals and Conservatives skipping down the road together into the summer holidays. Look, I think this bill, first of all, let's look at everything Susan said before she corrected herself a couple times, and I'll agree with the things she said accidentally, right? So first of all, it's a two-part bill, 100%. Why not make it two bills? I think there's unanimity on the fact that we need to get rid of the weird restrictions we have between provinces. There's no reason why a nurse who's trained and can be a nurse here in Ontario can't do the same work in Manitoba. There's no reason why we can't buy Alberta beer here in Ontario. That should be a different discussion.
Because part one of this bill is about internal economy.
Exactly, and it's important, and I think we are united on that. On the other one, it does actually make it so you can ram whatever they want through. Yes, they have this language around trying to make maybe there's more consultation, maybe we'll have Indigenous involvement from off the top, but one minister can remove all of that if they don't like what's going on. So yes, that's technically in the bill, but ultimately, if whoever the Prime Minister decides, and it's not actually named which minister it would be, one minister could just say, nope, we're not going to follow that. Or cool, went through this, all this environmental stuff needs to be done, we're going to skip it. And look, I am a New Democrat from Northern Ontario, mining town. I was a senior staff person in Saskatchewan and worked for Rachel Notley when we did get the one pipeline to Tidewater built. Projects need to happen, but just ask Stephen Harper how well they work when you try to ram them through. So if you actually like projects, big nation building projects, which I do, they won't happen if you don't have the proper processes, because they get held up in court, they get stopped, protests happen. So if you like Indigenous consultation, this bill tramples all over that.
It's in the bill.
It's in the bill until the minister says he doesn't agree. That's just in the bill. The bill, one minister gets to override everything. If you like laws and the rule of law and democracy, again, that's out because one minister gets to overrule everything. And if you like big projects, those are probably out because we're going to get tied up in courts and there's going to be protests and nothing's going to get built.
Okay, well, you know, I'm going to pick up on the point of Indigenous consultation, because we had Cindy Woodhouse-Neepanak here just yesterday, and she was talking about, you know, they have concerns. She's not opposing the bill outright. She does not have the mandate to do that from the members of the AFN, but they are concerned that essentially the bill sets out Indigenous consultation after the fact, after something is approved, and they still have questions in terms of what constitutes Indigenous consultation, who will actually be involved. And to that, Susan, you know, we are hearing these criticisms from certain Indigenous groups, not all. We're hearing concerns expressed by environmental groups about environmental regulations being suspended in order to get these projects pushed forward. Can this government afford to alienate environmentalists and Indigenous leadership?
Find me a community in this country that has 100% unanimity on anything. The closest you'll get is probably Damien Carrick's riding, where Pierre Poilievre's going to run. They had 82% unanimity. This bill does not trample on democratic rights. It has Indigenous consultation baked into it. And the objective is to have, for projects to come forward and to be ultimately approved, they have to jump through all the processes. But part of that is proper Indigenous consultation on the part of the proponent, the business, and also on the part of the government. The Prime Minister said today in his news conference, free, prior, informed consent. The Government of Canada will continue to uphold that. We have to do, you're never going to get 100% agreement on anything. I challenge anybody at their family dinner table if you get 100%. Maybe if you're going to have chocolate ice cream for dessert, but it doesn't work that way. We have to properly consult. Mitigation measures have to be put into place. Proper environmental assessments need to be done. It doesn't mean you have to have a duplicative federal and provincial one. Get one done. The provincial scientists are competent like the federal scientists are. So to change the way things are done in this country, to improve the way things are done in this country, to enable Indigenous communities to participate or have the option to participate from an equity partnership perspective, that's all what this bill is about. The government's even doubled to $10 billion the Indigenous Equity Loan Guarantee. And so there's an opportunity for communities to participate. There's an opportunity for communities to object. And if there's enough objection, a project won't go through. It's as simple as that.
Okay. Although very tricky waters for the government to be navigating, Jordan.
Yeah, and that's going to be the real test, is to see what the government's actually going to be able to get through, even through their own cabinet. I mean, their cabinet has gone out and said different things on different projects. I mean, Minister Guilbeault, who's become public enemy #1 of sorts in Alberta in many senses, who has the Canadian Heritage File, yet he's out opining on pipelines. So it's going to be interesting to see when some of these projects actually come around the cabinet table, and who's speaking up, and if the Prime Minister is very much committed to resource development, to getting our resources to market, and turning the tide from the last 10 years. That's going to be the real challenge that Canadians and Conservatives are looking for, if he's actually going to walk the walk in these projects and really push forward. So the consultation pieces, of course, are going to be very important. Otherwise, projects will just get held up in court and all those things. So I don't think we should look at this as one piece of legislation as something that's being rushed through. It's going to be everything that comes after it, and what leadership the Prime Minister is going to take from there.
Okay, George, what do you say to that?
Well, just quickly, I agree. Not every Indigenous community is opposed to projects. In fact, one of the chiefs with whom the Rachel Notley government worked most closely just outside Edmonton now sits in the Conservative caucus, and was a huge proponent of getting oil to Tidewater, and understood the benefits to his community, and their community supported it. So I want to be clear: no one's suggesting, or at least I'm not suggesting, there's some kind of monolithic opposition. What I'm saying is this piece of legislation does all those things that Susan said, and then one minister gets to throw it all away if they want to. And that's a major problem with this legislation. And again, what's going to happen, even if you want to get things done, when you try to rush things through, like there's a reason why Rachel Notley and Justin Trudeau were somehow the first people to get a pipeline to Tidewater. Because when there was a Conservative premier in Saskatchewan, a Conservative premier in Alberta, a Conservative premier in British Columbia, and a Conservative Prime Minister, they couldn't build anything because they couldn't get support for it, because they were trying to rush it through too quickly. And you have to build that support, and this bill does not learn those lessons. In fact, it runs in the opposite direction.
Okay. Well, we will watch. As we say, the government's trying to get this passed through the Commons before the end of day tomorrow. But before we're done, I also want to talk about Pierre Poilievre. We now know that the leadership review for the Conservative leader will be in January. But up against that, let's take a look at a Nanos poll here, because Nanos just tracked the fact that, since the election, you see there the Liberals have actually widened the gap of their lead over Conservatives. 2% on Election Day, April 28th, about 12% now as of June 17th. How does this add to the challenge that Pierre Poilievre has in terms of, justifying the fact that he should still stay as Conservative leader, Susan?
I think he's got some explaining to do, and he's calling up people himself instead of having the party do a proper postmortem on what went on. I think what you say to a leader when he's on the other end of the phone to you, who might be the guy sticking around in caucus and deciding your future, is a bit different than what you're able to say in the anonymity of a more proper, fulsome review of things going on. Those numbers mean Mr. Carney is on the right track as far as Canadians are concerned. That means people aren't thinking about Mr. Poilievre right now. And those numbers with that gap like that means people who actually voted for Mr. Poilievre in the election are turning and saying, well, this Carney guy's not so bad, and we'll park our support here for the moment. The other Nanos number that was super interesting is Carney's approval ratings as Prime Minister, 49.7%. Poilievre's down at 25 or something like that.
Yeah,
it's really low.
Actually,
yeah, 24. Yeah, super low. Big gap on that, too. So he's off the radar screen right now for people, and people aren't unhappy with the guy who's on the radar screen.
Okay, complicates the picture for Poilievre, trying to keep his job?
No, I don't think so. Just one piece quickly on the leadership review thing. I think having the leader pick up the phone and call people directly to see, to get their feedback, not filtered through staff, not filtered through the IDSM report, is actually a pretty good thing and a pretty solid leadership. Pretty solid leadership.
That's a tough call.
I was going to say that. Yeah, okay. Well, people are going to be honest, though. I mean, it's a career in the line. But getting back to the main point, look, any government coming out of an election in which they win tends to have a bit of a honeymoon period. And yes, Mr. Poilievre doesn't have a seat in the House, so he's not up there grilling the government every day. There's been a lot of pomp and ceremony with this government over the last month, with the King visiting, with the G7. So, I mean, Carney's been out there on some of these big files. Some things are happening. But, yeah, Pierre's going to take some time over the summer. He's going to get out there, meet with Canadians. The caucus is in great shape. They're very united, jubilant in the new people that are part of it, and he'll be back in the Commons with a seat on September 15th, and we'll be right back to normal. Oh, you will, and you'll get to see him much more over the next number of years.
Quickly before out of time, George, what do you say? Because it goes to the question of whether or not the party's better off with or without Pierre Poilievre.
Well, I think the party has become Pierre Poilievre as part of the issue that the Conservatives are going to have to deal with. And so I think he's pretty safe because people can't imagine someone else leading. I mean, that said, with Mark Carney taking up space well to the right of Paul Martin and encroaching on a lot of that progressive Conservative space, I think it's good. The Conservative Party itself is going to have a lot of thinking to do over the summer and how they redefine themselves so they can try to pull back some of those moderate Conservatives, because those people are gone to them.
Okay, well, that is the discussion. I'll note the fact that this is the last strategy session until the new season, unless something happens between now and September. But for this past year, for everything that we've done, you've been on and off, but appreciate you, Jordan, appreciate you, Susan, and of course, George, thank you to you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Well, to the Ontario Legislature at Queen's Park in Toronto now. This is where Premier Doug Ford had to explain a controversial comment he made yesterday, a comment about Bill 5, which is Ontario's recently approved law that fast-tracks developments considered key to shoring up the province's economy. Now, there have been serious concerns raised about that law, among them concerns about Indigenous consultation. But in trying to address those criticisms yesterday, take a listen to what we heard from Premier Doug Ford.
There's going to be a point that you can't just keep coming hat in hand all the time to the government. You've got to be able to take care of yourselves. And when you literally have gold mines, nickel mines, every type of critical mineral that the world wants, and you're saying, no, I don't want to touch that. By the way, give me money. Not going to happen.
Now, that comment elicited several responses, including this one from Saul Mamakwa, Ontario's only Indigenous member of provincial parliament. The NDP member saying the Premier's remarks today were deeply offensive and racist. This Premier has made it clear that he won't bring people together, uphold the honour of the Crown, and obtain free, prior and informed consent. Bill 5 was an assault on treaty rights. Now, this all happened just before Premier Ford had a meeting with Indigenous chiefs today. After that meeting, he did apologize for the comment made yesterday. And to walk us through the story, we're happy to have Robert Benzie on the program this evening. Rob is the Queen's Park Bureau Chief for the Toronto Star. Rob, hello.
Good evening, Michael.
So listen, we're going to play a bit of the Doug Ford's apology a little bit into this interview, but I want to begin first and foremost because, you know, here you have this meeting with Indigenous leadership in Ontario the day after a comment like that is made. So what kind of reception did Premier Ford get as he sat down with the chiefs?
Well, I mean, obviously, it overshadowed all of the intent of this meeting, Michael. This was about the Premier was meeting with the chiefs to talk about Bill 5. There are deep concerns in Indigenous communities and indeed other communities around Ontario about this legislation, which is the provincial version of Bill C-5, very similar type of law that is designed to fast-track mining projects and other infrastructure. And there are worries that this is going to lead to problems in these communities. So he was having to explain himself from yesterday before he could actually explain his hopes for Bill 5.
Mm-hmm. Now, as I said, he as you say, he explained himself, and he also did apologize. Let's play a bit of what we did hear from Premier Ford after that meeting with Indigenous chiefs. Take a listen.
I just want to say I sincerely apologize for my words, not only if it hurt all the chiefs in that room, but all First Nations. Because we know that if we work together, and I said during the campaign, nothing moves without First Nations consultation, respecting duty to consult, and make sure that we work together.
So that's a bit of the apology. I'll also say that, you know, the Premier defended himself by saying, you know, people know he gets passionate about things and, you know, essentially shoots from the hip. But I wonder, with that apology now made, Rob, does this affect the working relationship this government, the province of Ontario, will have with Indigenous communities as they try to pursue projects like the Ring of Fire?
It doesn't help, Michael, because I mean, the chiefs that he met with today from the 39 First Nations, they oppose Bill 5. So he's having a meeting with them to talk about why Bill 5 could be good for their communities, and he's having to apologize for an inelegant remark that he made yesterday. And I honestly don't believe he was trying to be hurtful. I think, though, he said to us today that he gets sometimes a bit excited and trips over his words, and that is true. He has had to walk back things that he said before, but I think it's such a sensitive subject, and treaty rights and the duty to consult is something that's very, very important in this country, and I think it doesn't help his sales job of Bill 5. Even though Bill 5 has passed, the Tory government here at Queen's Park is fixing it in regulation because there are some concerns about these quote-unquote special economic zones that normal laws don't apply, and that First Nations feel override their long-standing treaty rights. So it was a messy situation earlier today, and much of it was the Premier's own making.
Yeah, you know what's interesting is, you know, as you say, Ontario has adopted Bill 5 here in Ottawa, as we just heard from our political strategist. The federal government's trying to get its own Bill C-5 passed by the end of this week, end of day tomorrow. And really, when you look at it, the concerns are still the same. Indigenous consultation, concerns about environmental regulations being ignored in order to get these type of economic projects pushed forward. You know, you talk about the Ontario government making some regulatory changes. Are they concerned about legal challenges? Because ironically, if they're trying to speed up projects, if there is a legal challenge, it could, at the end of the day, delay these projects.
Exactly. And Michael, that's what First Nations have been warning the Premier. They've been saying, look, because this bill has been so poorly crafted, it's actually could slow things down. Now, their whole raison d'etre on this one is that they want to get things down to 2 years for an approval. Right now, it can take 15 years, they say, to get a mining project approved, because there's lots of duplicate environmental assessments, federal and provincial, and then local governments get involved. First Nations certainly get involved. So I understand the thinking behind streamlining things. The problem is the execution has not been great. And yeah, are there going to be legal challenges? Almost certainly.
Yeah, and I guess the other part of it, though, too, Rob, is what is the government saying about, you know, these legal challenges and really controversy like comments made yesterday by the Premier? Do they actually dissuade investment? Because at the end of the day, as much as you want to approve anything, without actual, you know, enterprise, private industry getting involved, it's not going to move forward. Are they concerned about dissuading investment by not clearing this all up?
Well, I mean, this is the problem, right? This is now another cloud hanging over this. Now, the Ring of Fire has been talked about for almost 20 years. This, this almost mythic, massive mineral deposits in northwestern Ontario, not far from Kenora. The problem is that it's hard to get to, and Premier Ford has made building a road to the Ring of Fire kind of his big infrastructure project for the last 7 years almost, and it's still not done.
Well, as you say, it's been long in process, the Ring of Fire. We continue to watch it. Rob, really appreciate it's been quite the story at Queen's Park. Thank you for the time this evening.
Always a pleasure, Michael.
Okay, take care. Well, that is our program for this Thursday. I'm Michael Serapio. For everyone here at CPAC, thank you for watching. Primetime Politics is back tomorrow evening. Until then, take care.